The race is on, and Lewis Hamilton had a dejected demeanour during the Hungarian Grand Prix weekend, but does that mean there's any doubt over his F1 future? And why has he struggled so much in his first half season with Ferrari? I'm Edd Straw, and joining me to answer those questions and more are Mark Hughes and Scott Mitchell-Malm. Well, Scott, hello to you. The last time I saw you was in this very hotel. You've made your way back. I'm still in Budapest, but how was your journey?
Yeah, journey was good, thank you. Had a couple of slightly different run-ins with people who have enjoyed the race's content at one point or another. I was having a chat with a couple of Swedish guys who were out at the Hungarian Grand Prix for the first time, but they go to sort of one race a year. So that was a nice little chat with them while waiting to board the plane, and then had another exchange completely by chance with someone who's a reader of the race who completely saved me. On when we were basically getting off the plane. So when I was boarding, I went to chuck my rucksack in the overhead bin because it was in the front row. Couldn't have it down with me, but they'd let loads of people who weren't sat near the front like just fill the bins up with all of the bags and small cases. And the very unfriendly cabin crew member, she got very angry with me waiting to see where I could put my bag and just demanded I go and put my bag down the back of the plane. And then I said, well, what do I do then? Do I just barge my way past people to get back? And she said, yes. And I thought, that's very helpful. So as I sort of shuffled into the queue and went down, the Swedish gentleman said, oh, you must be Scott. And then said he's a reader of the race. He's heard me on the Viaplay F1 podcast. We had a brief chat. And he had the same problem where he had to dump his bag halfway down the plane, slightly behind his seat. So we said goodbye, and then I walked back up to my seat. And then as we were getting off the plane 2.5 hours later, I thought, I'm screwed here. I'm just going to have to sit and wait. I'm just going to have to wait for the whole plane to get off so I can go and get my bag. So I waited sort of 5 minutes, half the plane had come off. And then as I stood up and I was just sort of waiting for everybody to come past. And then this gentleman appeared with my bag in his hands. He'd taken it off for me. So, and the only problem is, I'm normally very good at this when people say that they're fans of the race and want to have a chat. I completely blanked on asking the guy for his name. So he's like my own personal bag Batman. I don't know his identity, but he was the hero that I needed in that moment. So if he's listening to this, thank you very much. Taxi jättemycket.
Good language skills there. Yeah, go with the typical name. How about you, Mark? Any fun bag stories that you can match Scott's with, or are you bereft?
No, I didn't. I covered Budapest from home, so there was no travelling involved. It would have been quite ridiculous if I'd got myself caught up in some shenanigans like that whilst being at home. So no, everything's
Mark's
fine.
Just at an airport for no reason on the Monday afternoon, just because out of habit.
Well, let's see if I can match your story, because I'm heading off to the airport after we've recorded this. So we shall see if on the next podcast I've got some fun story of a similar nature, but hopefully it's a bit more straightforward. But anyway, let's get on to our main topic, because Mark, Lewis Hamilton's Hungary woes, they're a huge talking point and have been over the past few days since the race weekend, with loads of questions from the Race Members Club on the topic. So we're going to work through some of those by way of tackling Lewis Hamilton's struggles. And the first one is from Michael Sanderson, who asks if Lewis Hamilton's form is beginning to be untenable.
There's that concern, most definitely. If this was the form of a second driver, a Franco Colapinto or a Yuki Tsunoda, which, it's not that dissimilar if you're making the comparison to the lead driver, we wouldn't be surprised to hear, rumours that they're being looked at for replacements next year. Obviously, that's very different when it's somebody of the stature of a 7-time world champion, or 8-time, depending on your point of view. And let's not go there again. But I think he's the thing with Lewis is, obviously there's no question about the levels he can reach. It's a question, or has reached in the past. And there's no question he's nowhere near that level at the moment. And so is it a permanent trait? Is it an adjustment thing? And meanwhile, the pressure upon him ramps up, not just from himself, but also from the corporate side, of the financial side of Ferrari, which is, and he's made reference to it. He made reference to it earlier in the season. So I'm very aware that, the big bosses are looking at me. in terms of my performance, and rightfully so. And the way he's described his difficulties in the car makes sense, but there's sometimes evidence that he's made progress with that adaptation, but then you get a weekend like this one just gone, and it's gone again. So I can understand his frustration, but I don't know. None of us know what else is going on, and he made reference to some things that aren't great happening at the moment. Now, is that within the team? Is that in his personal life? Is that, we've got no way of knowing that. So it's all we know for sure is that he's under delivering at the moment, and we sort of know the physical reasons why in terms of what he's doing in the car, but in terms of what's going on in his head and where he's at with it all, obviously we've got no idea. And he's very misleading, Lewis, because he wears his heart on his sleeve, and so he can be completely down in the dumps, and you can think, well, that's it, he's lost interest, and then he'll bounce back and he's top of the world, 2 weeks later. So it's dangerous to read Lewis from his body language, because it goes up and down a lot. But I think this level of performance is not something that either he would be prepared to tolerate for another season, or the team.
The one thing to stress within that is that if you there's a danger of some recency bias in terms of thinking that it's a lot worse than it is, and the way that Lewis reacted in Hungary is exactly as Mark said, wears his heart on his sleeve. He's always, especially when he speaks to us in those moments, very, very driven by the result, in terms of his mood is directly correlates with the quality of the result, and especially the result relative to his teammate as well. So that was an extreme reaction on the Saturday in particular, but also the Sunday, because Leclerc was still at the sharp end for most of the race and led half the race, and Lewis was unable to get into the points. But if you went back beyond just the last two events, the double header before the summer break was a disaster from Hamilton's point of view. Pretty much couldn't have gone worse, really, apart from if he hadn't quite got into the points the way that he did in the Belgian Grand Prix on the Sunday. But if the season had gone into the summer break exactly on the midway mark before that, we might actually be having a slightly different conversation where we're saying, actually, whisper it quietly, but is Hamilton actually on the up at Ferrari? Is he actually matching Leclerc at the moment? Because there was a run of races before that double header where actually Hamilton seemed to be starting to put it together. But what I would say is, just you can't just judge Hamilton's first 14 races on the last two, but you can't also just pick 3 or 4 races that went well just before that. Like, you have to judge it on balance, and on balance, it's still not where he wants it to be, where he needs it to be, and it's still not, I think, what he and Ferrari would have expected overall, because he's carrying a pace deficit to Leclerc. On his very best days, he can shade Leclerc or just about be shaded. But there are days where he just makes a mistake, or the pace isn't there and he's 2 or 3 tenths off, or anything like that. And the main concern, I think, which is probably where Lewis is a little bit more worried at the moment, is where he's been at his best against Leclerc has tended to be when Ferrari's been a bit weaker. Now, that obviously the China sprint pole and race win doesn't come into that. He was fantastic then. And there's been other moments. Silverstone, he's always fantastic at Silverstone, and he was again this year. But I think there'll be a little bit of a concern. If we're going to go off the back of the last 2 races, I would say it's not actually the fact that the results were that bad, because that's explained by circumstance. I would say it's that Ferrari clearly made a step in terms of what its performance potential was within its car, and Lewis couldn't extract it for one reason or another. So just as the car got better again, Charles went with it. He's on the podium at Spa, he's on pole and leads in Hungary, and Lewis isn't there. And that's the concern, I think, that when the car's level goes up, does that gap against Leclerc become bigger?
Yeah, and I guess in terms of, there's a lot of speculation surrounding him. Lewis Hamilton has ceded that himself, hasn't he? Mark alluded to those things about the background. I mean, he was asked about the comments he made after qualifying about changing drivers, and he said, not particularly. When you have a feeling, you have a feeling. There's a lot going on in the background that's not great. And that does seem to hint at the fact that there might be forces at Ferrari trying to flick him and get someone else in. But I don't think we've seen any evidence that there's that, is there, Mark? Ferrari still want and need and are doing everything to make the Lewis Hamilton signing work, aren't they?
Well, it would be only logic if they did, and certainly Frederick Vasseur is fully behind him and is very defensive about him. But as to what's happening in the wider corporate world, no, we haven't seen anything solid, but wouldn't necessarily see that if that was going on. So I wouldn't be so adamant about that.
Yeah, it's just difficult. It's one of those comments that you can't really draw anything in itself from other than just raise a quizzical eyebrow. So, it's interesting to monitor. But, Scott, that relates to the next question from Benwood. How can Lewis Hamilton get his head back into the right place after a disastrous weekend?
I think he does quite like switching off for the summer break. I think he always uses, the last few years, I think he's used the summer break in different ways. But I saw there was some comments from him about spending a bit of time with family over the break, and I think he even admitted like there might be some tears just to sort of really just let out any of the frustration and confusion of the first part of the year. I mean, look, we were having this conversation in the car, weren't we, during the Hungarian Grand Prix weekend? I think on the way back on the Sunday night after the race, where does any driver need the gap more than Hamilton? Because a week before, you'd have said Kimi Antonelli needs this just to kind of switch off. But at least he went into the break with a little bit of a boost. Yuki Tsunoda still hasn't got that Sunday result, but he's just had his best weekend of the season relative pace-wise to that. Like you mentioned, Tsunoda's name's been mentioned, Colapinto as well. His name, he had a little bit of a glimmer of hope with his just raw speed in Hungary relative to Pierre Gasly. So a lot of the drivers that were kind of really in need of something at least came away from there with something of their own that they could grasp. And Lewis doesn't have that from Hungary. He can try and take some comfort in what Ferrari achieved and how the car looked and how good Leclerc was in it and say, okay, well, look, the car's clearly capable of this now. I need to get it together and be up there. But he didn't have that thing in himself where he was like, okay, great, I did that lap, I've got it. I just need to actually do it now. There's just still that little bit of a question mark. So I think more than anything, it'll probably just be a good thing for him to just not have another race in a week's time where he has to come back and go through that feeling yet like straight away. It's very interesting because Lewis is almost now in the position that he put Valtteri Bottas in so many times when they were teammates at Mercedes, where you're looking at Valtteri and just thinking he just needs a pause now and to kind of come back out the other side of this. And one of the things that was always so impressive about him, and even Checo Perez managed it for a couple of seasons at Red Bull, is you come away from an absolute battery and you rebuild over the winter. You have that 2 months away or something. You have time to switch off. You rebuild. You focus on where to improve. And they always came out stronger at the start of the season. And maybe then they couldn't hang on over the year, but it was always very impressive, that mental resilience. And Lewis will tap into something similar now. Just a little bit of time off, being able to have a bit more control over how much time he spends thinking about F1 and not. If around the summer shutdown, if he wants to go to Maranello and spend a load of time there, he can. If he wants to just do it on his own and decompress a little bit, he can. It's not the biggest window in the world to do it, but it'll probably do him good. It'll probably do him good. And if he comes back the first 1 or 2 race weekends after the summer break, has a difficult time and immediately slips back into that despondency that we saw in Hungary, I would be quite concerned about that.
Question now I'll take from Benjamin Tampan, who says, with Lewis so dejected after qualifying this weekend, could we see him retire at the end of the season if this form continues? Jeremy Husted, a similar question, and adds, if he stays on for 26, but the Ferrari is uncompetitive, what are the chances he retires mid next season? Well, ultimately, Lewis Hamilton, he's his own man. He has the capacity to surprise. I didn't see the Ferrari move coming. So it's not completely out of the question. He might say, oh no, at the end of the season, I've had enough. I don't get the impression that's what he's doing. He still seems to have a determination to make it work. And yeah, I suspect he does want to try and work it out in the second half of the season, pick it up a little bit and then go again in 26. But it's entirely up to him. Ultimately, if he decided, oh, this isn't working, I don't think this is going to work, I'm going to walk away, it was a bridge too far, you wouldn't begrudge him that. He can, but I think he'll battle on. He's made his career being pretty determined and working pretty hard, and I suspect that's the approach he'll take. But I think generally if 26 doesn't go well, then that is a big question mark. However, I think it's one thing if the Ferrari's uncompetitive, but I think the key will be how competitive he is relative to the car. If the car's a bit iffy and he's mega in it, I think that's a very different situation to if the car's, say, competitive and he's struggling again. I think that latter scenario is one that will be more likely to make him think after a couple of years, then, yeah, maybe it's time to go. But, yeah, he surprised me before. He could surprise me again, but I think he'll crack on.
Well, to loop that back round to, I think it was the first question, which Mark answered about whether this is sustainable. I think if 2026 plays out the same as 25, he won't want to continue beyond that, because the way this season's going at the moment and the sort of low points that he's suffering, because again, I think the good moments have been fine, and if he can get to a point this year where on weekends like Spa and Hungary, Leclerc's as strong as he is, and Hamilton gets back into that run of form where he's, a few hundredths of a second either side of Leclerc in that window, there's no problem at all. There's, that'll be absolutely fine. But if he has it where he's, chasing a couple attempts every weekend, or, he's something slipping up each weekend, and there are just too many weekends to the end of this season where Hungary or Spa is repeated to a greater or lesser extent, then you go into 2026 and it's a similar story, regardless of where Ferrari is in the pecking order, just as you say, relative to what the car's capable of, then no, it won't work. Lewis won't get any satisfaction out of that, and it's not good enough for Ferrari either. I think the other element to 26 is, of course, that he'll have hoped that switching cars would have sort of made him think, actually, do you know what? I can get on with this generation of car after all, and it was just a Mercedes thing. That's clearly not the case. There's still fundamental issues with this type of car. So the other element of 2026 is it's a completely different challenge from a car and engine package, different demands from the drivers, and if he can't get on top of that as well, and this pattern continues, he will know it's not the rules. He will know it's not the car. It's him. And that will be the moment, I think, where he goes, actually, this isn't going to come back. So it just depends. He's just running out of time to prove that, like, those very best moments are in him regularly, because you still see it. You know, it's not like he's gone off of a cliff and he's not irredeemable as a driver or anything. But over the rest of 25 and the start of 26, we'll know just how close to the end of Lewis's F1 career we are. But I don't think it's there yet. I can't see him walking away at the end of the year. But as you say, he surprised us before.
And the final question, Mark, which looks at this from a different perspective, from Anton Wilhelmsen. If this was the first year of regulation, would we see Hamilton announcing his retirement?
I don't know. It's always a dangerous game, second guessing somebody else, and extra dangerous trying to second guess Lewis. He's a very mercurial personality, as we all know. But I think there's two elements to his difficulties. One is the one that Scott was talking about before, the ground effect regulations, which came in 22, which sort of hurt his advantage over the others, which was always to be able to get that direction change very, very quickly with very late braking, and effectively making the corner short, because he get the direction change through weight transference, extreme weight transference, and had the ability to feel that the braking not just on the point of lockup. And that's not the ideal way of driving a ground effect car. But in addition to those problems, the generic ground effect technique that everybody's been forced to go down. The Ferrari has got an additional couple of things which hurt that natural way of his driving. So you got the fact that it uses a lot more engine braking than anything he ever used at Mercedes and McLaren before that. And also the fact that he doesn't like the feel of the brakes. They're not... The bite isn't instant enough for him. So the whole thing about the new brakes that he tried for the first time at Spa was that Brembo developed as something which would give him that more positive initial feel, so that he could, use the brakes more aggressively. But when that was combined with the high level of engine braking, it caught him out. So he liked that's why he spun the qualifying lap away in sprint qualifying at Spa. But at least all right, it went wrong, but at least it's making progress towards what he feels he needs from the car. And I think, that's probably why he's determined to at least get a feel for next year's car. But whether if he was delivering this level of performance in 22, it wouldn't have made sense to him at all. At least in his Mercedes years, he was quick. He was, slightly quicker overall in 22 than George Russell, only very slightly slower in 23. And it was only his final year there where he really he wasn't at a very high level. Maybe not at his peak level in 22 and 23, but certainly still a very high level. 24, we only saw the occasional peaks, and we're not even seeing those this year. So, that's the trajectory, and so that then raises the question in everybody's mind, and probably even his own, is that trajectory because of age? And is it because you can't? An old dog can't learn new tricks. Those questions might arise in his own head and contribute to the problem. So, it's all very difficult to pin down at the moment for him as well, I'm sure.
Yeah, and it's important to note things like the old dog new tricks thing. In Miami, he pretty much said that when he was in one of his dejected post-session modes. So certainly the trajectory needs to turn upwards, but it's a question of what the timescale is for that. Right, we're going to stay roughly in the world of Ferrari now, but we've got a question from Mark Swain, who poses a fascinating hypothetical. And let's just stress, this is a hypothetical. It's not going to be us saying what we think is going on in the background. This is purely a what if. And the question is, let's imagine that Ferrari does opt to replace Lewis Hamilton next year. Who replaces him? Scott, as a conundrum for you.
I don't know if it is much of a conundrum, to be honest, because I think they would just probably go and say to Io Komatsu, sorry, know that you thought you had Dolly Behrman under lock and key for 2 years, but here's a bunch of money or some free engines or something, and then it's Behrman in the car, I would imagine. And then knock onto that, I suspect that Komatsu reopens talks with someone like Yuki Tsunoda, who he was very keen to have, and I suspect might be is seriously at risk of being available on the market for 26. So it would be something like that, because when you've got the beauty of the situation, as far as Ferrari would see it, would be that they've got Leclerc. So you then do have the freedom to you can just basically then plan for your own future effectively. I don't think, first of all, you're never going to get a like for like replacement for someone like Hamilton, because he's almost uniquely experienced and he is uniquely successful. And the drivers that come closest to that, whether it's at the very experienced end of the spectrum, like a Fernando Alonso, don't think they're going to go there. Don't think you're going to pair Leclerc with Max Verstappen or chase after him. I think you back your own. I think it would just be Behrman's time to step up. I think Ferrari would see enough raw potential in there, even though it's been a slightly messy first full rookie season.
Yeah, probably a little bit early for Behrman. He's got a lot of rough edges to smooth out, as you've alluded to, but that is an easy in-house example. I guess if you're starting to look around, there's not actually that many available drivers, because if you go beyond that, you start looking in the realm of the sideline drivers, the Bottases and the Perezes, or the drivers who might be extracted from elsewhere. So there's quite a lot of complication to that sort of thing. So,
well, if you went down that route, I think they should go for Alex Albon. I think he's a great person to try and pair Charles Leclerc with. I think they'd get on really well. I know that Leclerc thinks very highly of Alex. I think he once called him the most underrated driver that he'd raced against in junior categories. He's a driver on the up. He's at his peak so far in terms of performance levels. So he'd be a great person to slot in. But it wasn't too early to put Leclerc in when he'd had one season in Formula One. I don't think Ferrari would have too much concern on that score.
Yeah, although I think Leclerc's Sauber season in 2018 was better than Behrman's has been so far. I've been impressed with Behrman's speed, but a few more rough edges. But yeah, needs must, so it's a logical move. But it's interesting you picked Alex Albon, because you could say the other Williams driver might be the obvious one to try and buy out of his deal to bring him back. And that relates to the next question we'll throw at you, Mark, which is from Kevin Twomey. Is it now fair to conclude that Ferrari made a mistake in dumping Carlos Sainz for Hamilton, and that Red Bull and Mercedes made even bigger mistakes in not signing him for their second seats?
Well, Carlos has had his own problems in adaptation going the other way around to Lewis Hamilton, for much the same reason. When you sort of drill down a little bit into why Carlos has struggled a little bit in terms of qualifying speed in that Williams, he says it's in combined braking. He said the Ferrari had developed it much more in terms of the combined lateral and braking phase of the corner, which tallies very much with Lewis talking about. It's got way too much engine braking for him. And that's all about how you get the rotation on the car and whilst in the early part of the corner. So I think, was it a mistake to let him go? Well, I think let's see how the Lewis chapter plays out. But it certainly there were no complaints about Carlos's performances, and certainly in his final year there, when he knew he was leaving, has probably put together his best season. So, was it a mistake? Maybe, but let's wait. And in terms of Red Bull or who was the other team that was suggested? Mercedes, yeah. I think he would maybe have found the same problems in adaptation as he's found at Williams, because it's a uniquely Ferrari development direction of the last couple of years, and that he's sort of become very familiar with, and you sort of have to unlearn all that. So I think he may well have suffered similarly at those teams.
He's an interesting case, though, Sainz, because he was talking about it in Hungary, and he said, "Oh, it's taken me a bit of time to adapt to the Williams," and then actually corrected himself and said, "Well, actually, I think I did adapt reasonably quickly in the end, but execution has been difficult." And that's an interesting case for Sainz, because he's not been at his absolute best, but he's also quite often there have been times where the speed's pretty good and the execution hasn't been there. He's had some strong weekends. Saudi Arabia and Imola stand out. Silverstone was pretty good. And even Belgium, actually, I would say he was Hungary, the country I'm still in. Hungary, he was pretty strong, but the Williams just wasn't. And some of those troubles with the Williams are just the limitation of the Williams, and Albon struggles with it as well. So Sainz's struggles at Williams are much, much lesser than Hamilton's struggles at Ferrari have been so far. So I would certainly say that. But it's an interesting question, isn't it, Scott? Because you could certainly make a strong case that Sainz, if he'd still been in the Ferrari, would have better results than Hamilton would. He'd have better results than Antonelli has done overall, I think, and he'd have better results than Lawson / Tsunoda have had in the Red Bull. So you could almost say that the answer to this question is yes on all counts, isn't it?
Yeah, I can see that, and it's interesting that you sort of chuckled as you finished that, because when you were talking about Sainz in Hungary, it reminded me of the fact that I did accidentally sort of laugh in his face after qualifying, but I did it in that way of I was asking him the question about because I thought he'd been doing a really good job on a difficult weekend for Williams, and I sort of framed it to him as just basically it seems you've done the absolute most you could in that car. Is it true? And if so, is that pretty much in keeping with your season, in that you finally have the weekend of nailed execution that you've been waiting for, and the car's rubbish, basically. And so I sort of I started chuckling as I was saying it, because it was more, in that kind of gallows humor kind of thing. The good thing is Carlos is a proper individual and understood where I was coming from immediately, so laughed back when he started answering the question. And I was quite relieved when that happened, because there was a moment where I stopped and just went, I think I might have laughed a bit too hard there. That might have sounded like I was genuinely enjoying the sort of bitter irony of his situation, which I was not.
He's probably just pleased it wasn't me haranguing him about his cricket bowling action again, as I did at Spa. But anyway, yeah, it's an interesting counterpoint, and certainly I think Sainz, he's been better than he looks at Williams, although unquestionably Albon has done the better job overall. I think that's a fair conclusion. But yeah, I think there's a few teams that will think they'd be sitting on more points with Carlos Sainz in the car. But I'd certainly agree with Mark that while the trajectory is that you could say, yes, Ferrari did make a mistake in dumping Sainz for Hamilton, it still hasn't fully played out yet. So let's see how that goes.
One thing I'd sort of throw to either of you, really. Actually, maybe Mark is a good one for you. I was thinking this yesterday, so it's just interesting that the Sainz, Ferrari, Hamilton things come up in in terms of what the members club are interested in. But I was wondering, sort of, what really do we think the upper limit is for Hamilton at Ferrari realistically? I'm wondering if it is Sainz's level. Is it basically that sort of 1/3 of the time he might be able to beat Leclerc, but 2/3 of the time he'll probably be behind? It's just a case of being respectably behind, because I would say that most of the time Sainz was very close to Leclerc, but maybe a handful of times over the year he could get nowhere near. And I think that's a sort of fair reflection of where Sainz was. Is that basically what we can expect from Lewis, or is there genuinely a scenario in which he is just outright the better Ferrari driver?
Well, I think if he got to that level of that Sainz was at, it would be an improvement on what we have currently. But I don't think that's what anyone would be satisfied with from Lewis Hamilton. I think Lewis Hamilton at his peak was absolutely awesome and could go head to head with anyone and have a fair chance of beating them. So I think that's what he will be looking for from himself. But maybe that's not realistic at this stage of his career.
Yeah, that's what he has to be going for, because he's Lewis Hamilton, isn't he? That's just what is expected from him, and that's what Ferrari want, and it's most importantly what he will expect from himself. We're going to round off this episode by taking some more questions from the Race Members Club on a range of topics. And remember, we've got a fantastic special offer on right now, 90% off for your first month's membership. For that, you get all sorts. There's bonus podcasts, our film club and book club podcasts as well, access to videos, the in-car insights chats that we do on an ad hoc basis during Grand Prix weekends, and much, much more. So 90% off for your first month. Right, Mark, the first question, which is very much tied into what we've been talking about in the world of Ferrari, from JW099. Is it time for Charles Leclerc to explore options away from Ferrari?
Interesting, isn't it? It depends how the landscape plays out, I think, in 26 in terms of power units and where, if anyone's got a big head start in terms of the aero concept that might last a season or two. So, yeah, I think it's you wouldn't be close to the idea. But at the same time, it would be a shame to jump ship just as it came good. So, and it's perfectly feasible that might happen. Ferrari is still an absolute top-notch team, regardless of any hiccups that it's tended to have. So I don't think it's imminent, but I do think it will be something that's very much in his mind and that he's open to. I think he will, if he did make that decision, it would be a very reluctant one, but he may come to the point where he just loses the faith, and he would be heavily in demand if he decided to do that, of course.
I think he might be there for as long as Fred Vasseur's there now, because I just have a sneaking feeling that Charles might begin to believe that if Fred can't turn it around, then maybe nobody can really turn Ferrari into what he needs it to be. But I think it would be an even more extreme version of Verstappen weighing up whether to leave Red Bull, because that emotional connection to Ferrari runs a hell of a lot deeper than even Verstappen's does with Red Bull.
Yeah, and of course, Leclerc, he turns 28 later this year. So he's into F1 middle age now, strange as it is to say about someone who's still only 27, but he will start to hear the ticking of that clock in the background. Right, Scott, a question from Thorin Gunnarsson, who says, the gravel spin in Australia, the controversial penalty in Silverstone, and the alternative strategy in Hungary. Does Oscar Piastri lose out every time in 50-50 scenarios?
There are certainly some big ones this year that have obviously gone against him. But I don't know, I don't know about that. I think I'm just having to think. The thing is, I think, and this is a mark of the quality of Piastri's season, he hasn't really left himself vulnerable to 50-50 scenarios very often. He hasn't needed to rely on, positive swings or anything like that. But generally speaking, I think if you're the second car on the track or you're on the back foot, you're trying to catch up, whatever, that's when you're kind of in need of those 50-50 scenarios. So if they go, so you're more likely to gamble, and therefore, if it goes wrong, so be it. But if it pays off, then you obviously win big, and it's much more noticeable. So for an example would have been in Melbourne, after he's run off the road and rejoined and he's further down the field, if there was something else in the final part of that race and he just went, well, I've got nothing to lose here, so I'm going to go the opposite of what the majority are doing, and it paid off, and suddenly he's up there and he's won, or he's P2. He just doesn't find himself in those scenarios, and I think that probably reflects just him doing a good job and putting together a good season. I think if you got to the end of the year and it was like there were 5 or 6 major incidents that went against him and only 1 or 2 against Norris, then yeah, you would look back and say, oh, he didn't really have the luck he needed that year.
I think, yeah, also if you look at the last 2 races, Spa and Hungary, you've got a case study there of how it's worked for him and against him. And if obviously Norris took the gamble of the one stop because he'd been lost places at the start, and he couldn't find a way by Russell's Merc, and that ended up being the way into leading to think about a one stop, which worked. But just the previous race in Spa, they'd gone. Carlos had gambled for the hard tyre a lap later, which was disadvantageous in that moment it was a gamble because he was behind. And that may have worked. It may have been that Oscar needed a 2-stop, but in the end, Oscar was able to, nurse the tyres enough that Norris's gamble didn't pay off. So, yeah, in both those races, Norris has taken a gamble because he's been the car behind. In one case, it worked, in the other case, it didn't.
Let's move on to the next question now from Padraig Riley. Hungary was another good race for Liam Lawson. Overall, it's looking more and more like the easiest Red Bull decision is move for Isaac Hadjar up next year and keeping Lawson alongside Arvid Lindblad. Yuki Tsunoda at this point is going to hang on almost as an accidental afterthought. Yeah, there is a potential trajectory there. I still think Tsunoda's got the opportunity to hang on to that seat. There's been some underlying encouraging signs, but there's still a lot of work for him to do, let's put it that way, in terms of what he needs to do to hang on to it. But knowing Red Bull, certainly I'm sure Helmut Marko will be keen for Lindblad to get into a Racing Bulls car, and probably, yeah, that with Liam Lawson delivering at a decent, solid level now, he's settled back in, then perhaps that is the most logical way of doing it. I still don't think it's the die is 100% cast on this, but it does feel like gravity is kind of pulling it all in that direction. Let's put it that way. And that would probably serve Racing Bulls quite well. But they might also say, well, we don't think Liam Lawson is the future. We don't think we're going to put him back into Red Bull Racing anytime soon. So we keep it him. We drop him. We keep Tsunoda. We move Lindblad in space of Lawson. So there's still all to play for in there. But yeah, certainly the scenario you suggest seems quite a likely possibility at the moment. Right, Mark, a question from Andrew Wilson. Is it fair to say conclusively that Sauber looks firmly on an upward trajectory for the rest of the year?
I think it's apparent that it's more than just occasional lucky result. They're consistently banging in the points now. And Bortoletto, more to the point, is really becoming much more consistently at a very high level. He's really doing a terrific job as a rookie at the moment. And at first, as you would expect of a rookie, at first it was just like patches and peaks, and then you'd have a couple of quiet weekends. But recently he's been putting those weekends together. It's very impressive. So it's partly driver in that part of the field where the cars are so closely matched. A driver really on form can make a massive difference, and I think he is doing. Not to forget Hulkenberg's brilliant performance, but that was more of a specific set of circumstances with the wet race and safety cars and what have you. But I think generally the Sauber team is looking on a much more solid foundation than in the last couple of years. I don't necessarily see it being on a curve that's going to continue upwards for the rest of the season. I think that it's a level. If it can maintain this level for the second half of the season, they would be very happy with that. So I think that's where they're at. They're a good, solid, competent team at the moment with a very, very highly promising and good delivering rookie.
Yeah, and certainly the car's quite a good all-rounder at the moment. Very, very good on race pace as well, which means it's always, even when it doesn't qualify so well, going to be a reasonable threat on a Sunday. Right, Scott, a question from George, who says, for Mercedes and George Russell, is there an incentive to push hard to overtake Max Verstappen in the championship, or should they focus on 2026?
Well, I think the incentive will be there because George and Mercedes will want the best result that they can get, but it won't come at in terms of upgrades because they're not going to bring any for the second half of the year. So it's not going to be incentivized in a way that detracts from 2026. What it will do is keep the trackside team, it will keep Russell, it will keep everybody laser focused on maximizing in 2025, because what you wouldn't want is, as everything developmentally shifts entirely to 2026 and it's all about making sure they don't make mistakes there and so on, it could just be a bit easy for attention to drift to 26 and just mentally not like check out or anything, but just lose like, I don't know, 0.5% of sharpness or something, just because it's all becomes a little bit, well, it's okay, we're going to get jammed tomorrow, like, so I think it'll keep them in the now and it'll just give them that carrot to chase for the rest of the year, but they're not going to throw anything at it. But they're not going to get tricked into putting the car back in the wind tunnel or anything to try and get an upgrade that then gives them that extra tenth that they need to conclusively beat Verstappen over the rest of the year.
And Toto Wolff said at the Hungaroring, no more upgrades this year. Doesn't mean there might not be any tiny little tidy-ups, but yeah, it's all guns blazing on 26. But I'm sure George Russell will see that as a personal target. I think he quite enjoyed beating Verstappen. Drivers don't hugely care, third or fourth in the championship. Doesn't matter a huge amount, but they do like these little targets they have.
I think Russell would quite like beating Verstappen to third. I think that would just feel a bit more significant.
Yeah, I think for him, probably in terms of that that future battle, that probably means more to him than it does to Verstappen, perhaps, as well. But basically, drivers and teams want to do as well as they can with what they've got. And I'm sure that'll be the case. Right, a question from Andrew Sillett. With hindsight, should you have included Red Bull in your podcast ranking the midfield teams? Yeah, well, they were very much in that range in the Hungaroring, weren't they? I still think we were right to not include them because they are the team that have won the most races outside McLaren this year still. But yes, it was not a nice weekend at the Hungaroring. They were not even the leading midfielder there. So if there's more Hungarorings, then certainly we will be. But I'm interested to see when they come back after the break what they have to say and if they really understand what went wrong at the Hungaroring, because it was like a weekend where they had the bad start but never recovered, wasn't it? And just struggled massively on grip. So maybe a tyre thing. But
I was a little bit worried about that. You say it was, just a tyre thing, because it just did feel a little bit like Helmut Marko and Laurent Mekies were just being a little bit too much. Oh, it's definitely going to be a one-off because this is just too weird. Like that just seemed to be the extent of the explanation they had for it. And I just thought it was odd because obviously that won't be all that they do. But considering they were openly saying, well, we don't know what the problem was, otherwise we would have changed it. I just don't see how you can say that and then be so convinced like they were that it would be a one-off. Like that's just, I'm sure that's based on that, they've done a lot of experiments over the weekend. So once they've had time to reflect afterwards and done their analysis, they'll see the root causes and they'll know how to address it for the future. But it did feel a little bit convenient to just go, it's just getting the tyres to work. As if that's going to be just like the only time this season that becomes a factor.
Yeah, well, I guess it's a one-off in terms of it is one of 14 so far. But then if it starts repeating, that's a concern. And with narrow margins in terms of the performance swings and a lot of those midfield teams making gains, there's every chance that Red Bull may be struggling a little bit. So yeah, really interesting to see exactly what their explanation is down the line and how the second half of the year goes. And Mark, the final question from Alexander Law. Aston Martin was able to score a decent number of points in Hungary. Does this provide some hope that there could be some more points where their drag efficiency doesn't have such a massive impact? Maybe Zandvoort or Mexico.
Yes, or Singapore. No, absolutely. It's a good analysis. That's the pattern of performance of the car when it's when you need aero efficiency, like it's Spa, somewhere like that. And that's a really extreme test of aero efficiency. It is nowhere, and you come to a track where you just need to pile the downforce on, and it's very good. So yeah, that does look to be the pattern of that car. So yes, those 3 tracks, Zandvoort, Mexico, Singapore. I'm trying to think if there's any others. I might be looking. I might struggle at Baku, but yeah, that's how it looks.
And in fact, that 16-point haul they got in Hungaroring is the biggest single points haul a midfield team has managed so far. This team, so that's launched them up to 6 in the championship, and not so far behind Williams. So it's interesting, isn't it? It means that if you look at the performance patterns, it feels like sort of Racing Bulls or a Sauber can score points a bit more consistently, but maybe Aston Martin can get a few more of those big results. They can get both cars up there on the strong weekends. So yeah, makes for a fantastic midfield battle for the rest of the year. Well, thanks very much, Mark and Scott, for your excellent insights on all sorts of topics, and thanks to the Race Members Club for the questions that have very much formed the foundation of this podcast. There will be a members exclusive F1 extra that will go out at some point, where I'll sit down with Glenn Freeman to tackle a few more questions. But as I always say, just because it's the August break doesn't mean we're going to stop podcasting, so stay with us for everything you need to know from the world of Formula One.